Hello, good people. This is Sister Julia Walsh, and you're listening to Messy Jesus Business. Welcome to the Mess. I'm here with Timone Davis, who is an associate professor in the Institute of Pastoral Studies at Loyola University, Chicago, and is an instructor at the New Frontiers and Preaching Academy at Aquinas Institute of Theology. After working for the Archdiocese of Chicago, Timone co-founded Peace-Centered Wholeness with her husband Orlando, where they blend clinical counseling and spiritual companioning. In her spare time, she serves as the associate convener of the Black Catholic Theological Symposium and hosts the podcast Skinny Thoughts on Christ's Peace. Hi, Timone. Welcome to Messy Jesus Business.
Hello. I'm glad to be here.
You're probably in the middle of a busy teaching term already, as you are a professor at the Loyola University Chicago Institute of Pastoral Studies. So I want to thank you especially for stepping away from the busy time of teaching and to be with us and to share your story, your wisdom, your experience, especially in this time that we're in, and see where that takes us. So Timone, I always like to start with people's story. How did you become who you are today? This effective minister, teacher, and prophetic voice in the U.S. Catholic Church.
Falling down a lot.
Yeah.
Falling down a lot. You know, when you think about who you're going to be, right? What do you want to do when you grow up? And who do you want to be? It was always to be a doctor.
Oh, really?
A pediatrician, actually. And so I went to school thinking like, yeah, I'm going to be a doctor. I majored in biology. And probably like junior year, I was like, yeah, med school is just not going to be it. I like school, but I don't like it that much. So my trajectory changed when I went into the military. So I went to undergrad on an Air Force scholarship. When I was commissioned, I moved into logistics, or I became a supply officer. That wasn't my chosen field either, but, you know, circumstances kind of, you know, push you in different directions, and then you make it what it is. And so I thought that I would make a career in the military. I was just like, yep, I know how to do this. This is fine. I met a man in the military who was enlisted, and my commanding officer said, choose the military or choose the man.
Wow.
So that ended my military career because he was enlisted and I was an officer, and she made sure that I didn't get promoted to next rank, which would have been captain. You know, it's funny because I reached back out to her some years later to thank her for everything that she had done and taught me, and that I realized that I had learned a lot from her. And so she asked me, she said, so are you still with the man? I was like, girl, no, you saw that right. I did ask her, why did you do me like you did, basically? And she said, I saw general in you. And as a Black woman in the military who had the potential to be general, I wanted that for you. I said, well, yeah, it would have been nice if you had said that. And so from that experience, I learned that it's important to say what we see, right? To say, what do we see in people? You know, because sometimes when we can name it for people, it can become possible, or at least gets them thinking, right? I ended up in Chicago, and in my first marriage, my husband brought 2 kids to that relationship that I was like, well, I'm in Chicago, they'll be in Catholic schools. Because I was like, Catholic school, Chicago public school, it's going to be Catholic school all the way. And when we moved them to a particular school, the thing was, you got to show up at church. And I was like, do I get a discount on tuition if I show up at church? And because at that point, I didn't have a great relationship with God. I was definitely not trying to be in tune with the Catholic Church, but I was willing to do it for these kids. And while I was at this parish, the pastor, see again, naming things or being able to call things out, the pastor named for me, hey, I think you could be involved in, or I would like you to get involved in. And so he kept calling me forward, calling me forward. And I got involved with the rite of Christian initiation for adults.
Mm-hmm. Just to be clear, were you Catholic actually at this
Always
point?
Catholic.
Okay, got it.
Always Catholic. At this point, I wasn't a practicing Catholic, but
Uh-huh.
I've always been Catholic.
Got it.
RCIA, it's really funny because I didn't think I was equipped. The first year that I was helping him out, I used to skip class. I was a true college student. I think, I know this already. I could skip class. He don't need me. And then the second year that he asked me to be involved, I was like, dude, I'm going to need a class or something. You want me doing this stuff? And he was like, you went to Catholic University. I said, that was only so that I could pass the class. I wasn't trying to get any information, you know? And so I need something that I'm going to get some information. You're making me responsible for other people's journey. He sent me to a master catechist class that the archdiocese was doing called Catching the Spirit, which was a master catechist class that focused on African American spirituality. And I caught the spirit, right? I was intrigued and I was like, hey, this is really nice. So what I was learning in the master catechist class, I was taking back to the RCIA in the parish. And so what happened is the pastor started skipping class. I would be like, dude, like he was like, yeah, you seem like you got it. And so I'll be back to lock up. And I was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so after that, I told him, I said, I'm gonna need another class. You leaving those people to me, and it's my responsibility. I'm gonna need another class. And he said, I got a perfect thing. I need you to go over to Catholic Theological Union, and I need you to talk to Sister Jamie T. Phelps, OP, who's in charge of this program called the Augustus Tolton Pastoral Ministry Program, which was a scholarship program for African American lay people who would be getting their master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I don't need a master's degree. I just need another class. And he said, yeah, go talk to this nun. And she's very busy. It took me probably 2-3 months to get in to see her. And so I finally got in to see her in December of 95. December of 95, I'm sitting down, I'm having this conversation with this nun, and she's like, oh, you would be a great candidate for our program, blah, blah, blah. When do you think you want to start? And I said, sister, like all things, when people start school in the fall, right? And she said, I'll have you registered for January. I said, sister, it's December. She said, yes. I'll have you registered for January. Term starts in about 3 weeks. I said, no, I don't think that's going to be possible. I have a life and I got to do things. I have a child. And she says, we all have to decrease so that Christ increase.
Yeah.
I said, what the hell does that mean? And I was like, that, what? She had me in school in January. I was just like, this is insane.
So another naming what she saw.
Another naming, right? So another naming.
She named the potential.
She named the potential. And so I got my MDiv. And it was funny because you could get a Master of Arts in Pastoral Studies, an MDiv, or a Master of Arts in Theology. I think that's what it was, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was like, what's the difference? Because I wasn't really interested, but I'm like, y'all got me in here. So what's the difference? And so they talked about the difference. And I was like, well, let me do this MDiv thing because that seems like that's the most well-rounded. I don't know what it is that I'm going to do with this degree, but okay, let's do that. In the midst of the degree, right? So you're doing the academics, but we were also doing formation, much like religious communities do formation, because it was at CTU. And so what Sister Jamie had done was model this on religious life, where you are in formation as long as you are in your studies. And so the transformation, right, was happening over time to where by the time I graduated, I had quit working at a Fortune 500 company. I had taken a job working in a high school to teach theology, which I had no experience doing. Um, but it was a blast of my life. I found out that I enjoyed teaching. So I went back to this pastor who had since retired, and I asked him what he saw, right? That he kept calling me forward and naming things.
Again, yeah.
And he said, I saw you. And I was like, what? He said, I saw you. And so part of the work that I'm doing now at Loyola teaching is to help name things for people,
Yeah.
to name what it is that I see in them to help them along the journey.
Right. And you're in such a formative, are you working, wait a minute, are you working with both undergrads and grad students? Is that right?
Just graduate students.
Just graduate students. Okay. So, well, anyway, I'm conscious of how those years, but graduate school too, it's so incredibly formative. Like you talk about this, saying what you see, naming the truth, naming the potential in people. It's incredibly powerful. I'm reminded too of like how in my own story, it was undergrad and I had a couple professors who sort of pulled me aside and like gave me that little talk of like, Julia, you've got something. You get this in a different way than other people do. And it seems like God has a different sort of plan for you. So you need to, think about that. And here I am,
Right.
Sister Julia, FSPA, right?
And you're just like, whose idea was this?
Right? So, right, the power of that. Can I just go back to the beginning and say, it feels a little ironic to me that you started in the military and you could have become a general because we talked about the background before, your decorations around you before we started recording. You have set up around you. I can't even count how many peace signs there are. In your environment right there. And in your, in those cloths that you have a little sign, you have a cross, you have angel statues, Sister Thea Bowman is there, right? It's like you're surrounded by all these other things now that seem to tell a very different story about who you are. So I wonder if there's been a conversion or do I misunderstand something about the stereotypes of military versus Christian?
Military. So, like a lot of people in the Black community, the military provides a way out of circumstances, right? In my instance, the military afforded me tuition-free education.
That's what it was about.
Right? I'm not going to say it was never about serving my country, but it wasn't about serving my country. It was about I'm getting this education. And my commitment is they give me 4 years, I give them 4 years. It was doing the work that I realized the importance of the military. I want to, got to tread lightly here. The importance of the military when used correctly, right? Because military might can be misused. And so when we think about serve and protect, it's the role of the military. But we also have as parts of the military where we invade and we secure based on political agendas. Right?
Yeah.
But at its core, it is to serve and protect. But the peace symbols and those things, I think all of us have paradox within us.
That's right.
And I was always in a Catholic space. Let me say it that way. Catholic elementary, Catholic high school, Catholic undergrad. Catholic institution for my master's and my doctorate. But it had taken me a while to begin to internalize what it means to claim being Catholic, little c, universal in that sense. So when I was getting toward the end of my MDiv, my mother handed me a box, a jewelry box. Well, wait, before we get to the box, I had this affinity for peace symbols. I'm a kid of the 70s, the late 60s and the 70s, so peace symbol. I had already gotten a tattoo of a bleeding cross so that I could be reminded of what Christ sacrificed for me and to keep getting up, right? Because as a Black woman in the United States, you know, you got to keep getting up. And so the cross for me was to keep getting up. And then this peace symbol that I added later to symbolize Christ's peace. If Christ's peace can reign in the world, there would be no need for any other type of peace, right? We could. And so if I could obtain Christ's peace in my life first, then I could extend that to other people, right? So my mother hands me this box, this jewelry box, and I open up this box and there's a cross in it made out of flattened nails. And there is a medallion necklace that has praying hands on it. And it said peace on it. And I was like, Mom, wow, this is so nice. Kind of going with my Christ peace thing. And this is what I said, where did you find such things? This is so cool. She said, oh, those were yours when you were in high school. I said, what? She said, those were yours. I said, you bought them for me when I was in high school? And she said, no, you bought them for yourself. I said, are you telling me that I have been on this journey since high school? She said, yes. And I thought now was a good time to give them back to you. You left them when you went to college. And I was like, damn, that's deep right there. Right?
Beautiful.
To discover a part of you that you had forgotten.
Yeah.
So now I was like, so who was I in high school? Because I don't remember quite being a person who was embracing God, but at some point I clearly was, right? That I would buy those for myself. And I asked her, I said, well, did I wear them? She said, all the time. All the time.
So interesting. You had forgotten.
I had forgotten.
So interesting.
But it came back to me, both the cross and the peace, right?
Yeah.
But instead of praying hands, I chose the peace symbol. And so now I'm on this trajectory, right, of Christ's peace that guides what I do. So when 9/11 happened, I was teaching class, high school. And I happened to be wearing my mismatched earrings, right? The mismatched earrings of the cross and the peace symbol. And decided in that moment that those would be the only earrings I would wear. Some form of a cross and some form of a peace symbol until Christ's peace reigns. And so we do these little things for ourselves, right? To keep us moving forward. Yeah. And they also become points of conversation or interjection for other people to be like, why do you always wear the same earrings? Every time I see you, you always have a cross and a peace symbol. Well, hey, thank you for the open door. So now I can talk about Christ, right? Yeah. And we can have this conversation about how do we make Christ manifest in the world for people. And so I try to do it in the background too, right? Of where I'm sitting. You know, I'm teaching online, so it helps, right? That students get to see something. It all depends. people typically don't ask about the background and what I put up, except when I change it. So if I was to change it halfway through the semester, then students would be like, hey, what happened to the peace symbol cloth that you had in the background? Or what happened to the blah, 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 which tells me that they do pay attention. They just don't always ask.
Uh-huh.
One of the things that I learned when I was at CTU and we were in formation is to create an environment, right? That the environment is also important for what it is that you're trying to curate or cultivate. And so I try to create an environment behind me for what it is that I'm trying to cultivate.
I'm hearing so much there about intentionality, right? And the power of symbol as a way in to communicate, but also to remind oneself of who one truly is and claims to be and is aiming to be, which is all really fascinating for me because I wasn't anticipating this, but I have this lingering question now that I just want to hear your take on, because you've had your feet in the military world, and for myself, I've been a person that's been on the outside, but honestly has just been really critical of it because of my own analysis and because of my own devotion to Christ and my desire too to help peace reign. And so it has always bothered me how our culture, how our society, how we really celebrate war heroes. And militarism is celebrated so much, but peacemaking isn't. And peace heroes are not celebrated. The people who have been conscientious objectors, who have done acts of civil disobedience, in some ways it's as if our history would like to forget them. That really bothers me. And I'm curious about how you, as a teacher, what are you thinking about regarding that tension? And then what do you communicate to your students regarding the contrast?
I think peacemakers are often seen as weak.
Yeah.
When we think of success in terms of might, in terms of domination, in terms of oppression, then peacemaking seems weak, right?
And I almost want to start crying just thinking about how that mindset, Timone, has gotten our world to the state it's in now.
Of course.
I have so much to lament there.
Let me say it this way. Why was it so difficult for people to accept Jesus as Messiah? Because he didn't come in the form that people expect for success and ruling and overcoming, right? He comes as an ordinary individual and asks other ordinary individuals to join him. And everybody is like, yeah, but we need you to overthrow Rome. Right? And he says, yeah, well, we'll probably get to that. But first, we got to feed the hungry and we got to clothe the naked and we got to pay attention to the. And they were just like, what the hell, man? No, we need to go in with this military might, right? Here's the thing. When you are pressed down so much, you want something drastic to happen. So you think then military might is drastic. It will overturn it and it'll do it quickly.
People want fast solutions when they feel really desperate.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We want it to be fast, but
right.
But the truth of the matter is war does not solve our issues.
Never.
Now we know that. So when you go to school on a ROTC scholarship, you are studying war. You have to take the courses, but you're studying war.
I was a history major and I studied war too, but from a different angle.
See? Yeah. And it all depends on what type of history you're looking at, right? See, so you're studying war and you come to understand how you can end up in war. When you are taking it from the standpoint of relieving the pressure on the oppressed. What happens, though, is that military might begins to believe their own press and believe that it is the only solution, right? But there are other ways to be. So, what do I teach my students? We don't talk a lot about me being in the military. Not a lot of people know. I mean, people find out and then they go, "What? Really? That seems odd." And I was like, "Yeah, well, what I am trying to help students know is that the work of Jesus is slow and consistent and often lonely." Because I want people to understand that when you are doing the work that God calls you to, God is speaking to you. And God does not always let the other people in your life know what God has said to you. Right? And so it can be lonely because you start acting out of, living out of what God has said. And people are like, "What are you doing? What are you talking about? What do you mean you want to go back to school? Nobody have money for that. Quit your job. Who does that? And you want to go do what?" See, you get opposition, right? And so I try to let people know these are some of the things you're going to face when you are following Jesus.
Am I hearing you say in a way here that for you, discipleship requires like persistent devotion, but also clarity of mission?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have to know what it is
Yeah.
that you're embarking upon, which is why naming is important.
Right.
Helping people to name. Like so at IPS, there are people who go, "I don't know what it is I'm supposed to be doing, but I do know that I'm supposed to start taking classes." But they don't know beyond that. I was one of those people. I started taking classes to be a better RCIA coordinator. Right? That's how I started. And when people say, "So what are you going to do with this degree when you finish?" I don't know. Aren't I going to be a better RCIA coordinator? Like, this is what I'm starting on. And so we have to make room for people's calls to develop.
Yeah. I mean, isn't it true that so much of vocational discernment is really about allowing things to unfold?
Yes.
And to just pay attention, like, oh, okay, this is leading to this. One thing leads to another.
Yes.
And I think that's what I'm hearing in your story too. Yeah. I'm curious if you might share a bit more about what you know, what you've noticed about how to help the internalization of the gospel to foster that in a person. I mean, there's people that come to your classroom are like, they're hungry, they're ready. But many of us in our daily lives, we're interacting with people who are just maybe curious, like, what's up with her? Why is she joyful and whatever, And it's like, I want my witness, my storytelling, my love, whatever I'm doing, to somehow invite them to a deeper place, right? Maybe I need to stop wanting things. Maybe I need to get out of the way and just trust God. But like, I'm wondering if you have some tricks of the trade. I mean, you're older and wiser than me, Timone. I'll say this. I recently led a retreat and it was a beautiful experience. And I felt so honored to be there. And for a few different reasons, afterwards, I found myself wondering if there's a way as a teacher, as a minister, as a preacher, we can invite people to spiritual maturity more often. So they're not just coming to hear what they want to hear, but they're open to that conversion that flips everything around and causes them to surrender.
Anybody who's been to a workshop that I've done, who has heard me preach, who's in a class, who take a class with me, at some point they will probably all say, I asked the deeper question.
Mm.
I am not interested as an instructor in you regurgitating the material that we read. I'm not interested in that. But
Right.
what I am interested in is, how does the information that we are reading affect you
Yeah.
in your day-to-day life? And so I may ask a question. Here's a wonderful example. I had students reading about the Trinity. And so we're reading, it's a Protestant author, Faith Seeking Understanding, an Introduction to Christian Theology, the fourth edition. And students are reading that, and Migliore has a wonderful section as he talks about the Trinity. And what I've asked students to do after reading that is to respond artistically.
Mm.
Your response to this is to either create an art piece or take a picture or something, give credit to who, if it's somebody else's picture, that represents the Trinity for you.
Yeah.
Now, that sounds real simple, doesn't it? That's all you got to do. Students ask a lot of questions. Okay, so what if I don't draw well? If you're not a drawer, maybe you're a poet. Right? If you're not a poet, maybe you do prose, you do short story, right? If you're not either one of those, maybe you're a musician. But I need a creative response. I said, but what you cannot do is write an essay.
And it's stretching them to another part of their brain, right? So
Yes.
it's not analysis now, but now it's become soul work, doesn't it?
Yes. See?
Yeah.
It gets
So,
them to go deeper,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So they're going deeper. So I'm going to be asking the questions or giving an assignment
Yeah.
that says, based on this,
Yeah.
how does this show up in your living? So we just did also statements of faith, where we were covering the creeds, and then they have to write their own statement of faith.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, this is the sort of stuff I did in my classroom too. You're making me miss teaching.
But you could still do it on your retreats.
Yeah.
You still do an aspect of it on your retreats, right?
Yeah.
So I believe to help people then live the gospel is to be able to ask the questions that have them interrogate their living.
Ah.
If the gospel remains in the pulpit, right, from where it was proclaimed, and it just filters in the air,
Yeah.
then I don't know what to do with that. But if there's someone, some word, something in the bulletin, some encounter that says, what does that look like in the kitchen when you cooking dinner?
Yeah. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? If we can't do that for people, then then the gospel remains a text that's just that, a text.
That's true. So you're bringing the gospel alive. What is preaching?
Preaching then is unpacking that word for people into these bite-sized pieces that they can take home and go, oh, I got this morsel here.
Yeah.
Sometimes preaching is, I had to puree it, right? So that you can drink it because it's too complex. And so I had to puree it up. But preaching for me is this breaking open of the word of God, so where you can see yourself and an aspect of that word being played out in your life, or that needs to be played out in your life. It's something that invites you to look at who you are as person and how you're moving about in the world.
Yeah. And I know that you're a very effective preacher. It's
You've been
how
listening to my
first,
podcast?
yeah. Let's give it a shout out again. What is it?
Skinny Thoughts on Christ's Peace.
There you go. And especially since Messy Jesus Business is winding down and I need to make recommendations to my listeners for new podcasts for them to listen to.
What you mean? You winding down?
Yeah, we're going to land with
Oh,
100 episodes in
ooh,
December. So that's pretty
nice.
solid.
That
Yeah.
is pretty solid.
Skinny Thoughts on Christ's Peace. I hope they all subscribe and listen to your amazing preaching.
Thank you.
And I'm curious though, because we all are baptized, no, priest, prophet.
Priest, prophet, and royalty.
But I was going to say preacher, but I guess we're not all baptized preachers. But some of us clearly are called, and when you know that adage that's oftentimes put upon St. Francis of Assisi, which is not his words, that we are called to preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. That is, I think, true to everyone who's living the gospel, Franciscan or not. We all are meant to proclaim the word by how we live our lives, by how we let the word interrogate our lives, like you were saying. So I'm curious, because you're such a skilled and experienced preacher, how do you prepare to preach? What goes into good preaching for you?
It's going to be different for every person, right? On
Yeah.
how they're preparing to preach on the word. But for me, it's going to start with the text.
Yeah.
And reading the text, deciphering. Now, what do I mean by deciphering? My theologians and my other preachers would say I would do an exegesis of the text, and I would get behind the language and all of the technical aspects of what do these words mean. But I didn't study Greek. I didn't study Hebrew.
Yeah.
I don't know any of those. So sometimes I use a commentary. Sometimes I'm looking things up. But I read a text and I take notes. What jumps out for me when I read the text? First read, what jumps out? And I use small pieces of paper. Large pieces of paper get lost for some unknown reason. And so I use small pieces of paper. And then I walk away from the text. And then I come back to the text. It could be a day later. And I come back to the text to find out what the text is saying to me. And I write some more notes. I have gotten to the point where I can write a sermon in a day. It used to take me a month, but I can do one in a day. I sit to write the sermon when the Holy Spirit tells me you have enough notes. And I am a writer who has to write with a title. So it has to have a title first before I can write. I read the notes. I sit with the Spirit, and I got some music playlists that I've been listening to now for the last 15 years. Same playlist for any writing that I'm doing. And it has stuff, nature sounds, Gregorian chant. And so I turn that on when it's time to write, and then I let the Spirit do the Spirit's work.
Actually, what you're describing is a similar process to my own. So I think that's so beautiful. Well, we were both trained to preach at CTU. Maybe that's part of it. But
that could be. It's funny. I was preaching before I got to CTU.
Yeah, and I was too. Yeah.
Which, people say, oh, that's because your father was a preacher. But I don't ever remember going to my father's church when I was growing up to hear him preach. And so when I connected with my father as an adult, I did so because I was at CTU. And then I went to hear my father preach. And one of the things that I was intrigued by in his preaching is that he didn't use lofty words. It was always reachable. And so for me, the preached word needs to be reachable, right? I preach to an intergenerational audience. So it's not just a message for middle-aged people. It's not just it's what is God trying to say through me. And I am never sure until it's preached. Like I preach from a manuscript. I'm a manuscript preacher. And yet the Holy Spirit always finds some space in there for, yeah, but we're going to say something else. Or we're going to say something extra. And I'm
Right.
like, okay, well, it's your word, not mine anyway. And so I think, though, what's important is to let people know that it is the text that leads, right? That it's God who's leading through this text and not me. I'm very clear in my preaching when it is about me.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is happening to me, story coming through me or whatever. But for the most part, I work to get out of the way of what God is trying to say.
And isn't that the work of each of our lives? We're all trying to get out of the way of God.
We're trying, but man,
Or
some
just,
days it's difficult.
Pooh, right. So that brings us now, we're at the end of our conversation, and I'd like to ask you what you have to say about the messiness of gospel living. What would you want our listeners to be pondering and integrating into their lives?
First, drop or eliminate, get rid of a notion of perfection.
Yes.
How that entered into our lives, I have no idea. When I think about my own life and the days that I snap off at somebody, or the days that compassion is at an all-time low, I am reminded that this journey is not linear. It is not always smooth. That when we are encountering another person, they're also encountering us. And I think that's something that we forget. We always talk about encountering someone else and what that other person is doing, but we don't always talk about what we're bringing to the encounter. And so the messiness is, I'm a messy person. My life is sometimes running off kilter. And if I have to interact on one of my bad days, right? On one of my days that I'm not feeling it, on one of my days that, I just feel like the world is pressed down. As a Black woman in this world, sometimes when you look at the news, you'll be like, hey, what else you doing to Black people today?
Right.
And then I need to encounter you, and I'm supposed to bring some aspect of hope just to be real, to understand that, hey, I don't have hope right now. I don't have a picture of hope right now because this is what's happening to me right now. Vulnerability in our relationships will go a long way to understanding the mess we carry and the mess we encounter. Right? If I can, again, let's circle back to, can I name what I'm dealing with?
Yeah.
In an honest encounter with you, that opens the door for you to be able to name what you're dealing with.
Right.
And that's going to come through our vulnerability, and vulnerability is messy in and of itself.
Amen to that. It's a powerful force, though. I mean, that's the cross for us.
That is the cross for us.
That is the cross of peace. So, Timone Davis, thank you so much for coming on Messy Jesus Business. And to conclude, I just would like to give you a little space to share how our listeners can support you and your ministries.
Oh my God, come and be a student at the Institute for Pastoral Studies. No.
There you go.
Yeah, come and be a student.
It was the dean of your faculty that said, you need to have the Timone on.
It was, right? That was Peter. That was Peter Jones. But at Loyola University, at Loyola University, Chicago, Institute of Pastoral Studies, let me just say, all of our degrees and our certificates can be done online. So you do not have to move to Chicago. The other thing is trust that God is speaking to you. Yeah. And that God is nudging you, and understand that not everybody is getting the same nudge. So if you go and share that with your friend, they may not understand because it's not their nudge. It's your nudge. My podcast is Skinny Thoughts on Christ's Peace. We try to drop an episode every couple of weeks. I think we're back on cycle. I do batch recordings. So I do a bunch of sermons all at the same time. So check it out and tell me what you think, right?
Yeah.
Send an email to christpeace@gmail.com to let me know what you think of the podcast.
That's a perfect email address.
Christ Peace.
How did you get that? Amazing.
It started as X Peace because I didn't think people were ready.
Oh.
And then I was like, no, if you're going to do this God thing for real, then you need to put Christ. I will tell people, though, it's grammatically correct the way it's spelled. It's CHRISTS. Christ's Peace @gmail. So drop me a line. Listen to my show. Thank you so much, Julia, for bringing me onto your show to just talk about how God shows up in our lives. God is not waiting for us to be perfect. God is not waiting for us to set things right. We can't do it without God, and God enters right into the messiness of our lives.
Amen. Thank you so much, Timone.
You're welcome.
God bless you and your ministry. Messy Jesus Business is produced and edited by Colin Wamskans. You can find us online at messyjesusbusiness.com and on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Patreon. If you like what you heard, please be sure to mention our podcast to your friends and followers. And we'd love to have your support via Patreon. From the bottom of our hearts and the middle of the mess, thank you. Messy Jesus Business is produced in partnership with the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. You can learn more about our religious community and donate to our mission at www.fspa.org. I'm Sister Julia Walsh, and I'll catch up with you next time. Until then, peace and all good.